Hello, I'm Laura Copley-Smith, and Fiona Adams has joined me again for a fireside chat, except we have no fire. And we are talking about women and money. We're exploring that topic. So, Fiona, it's lovely to have you with me today again.
Thank you, Lara.
And we are talking about addiction and how that impacts or can impact your financial future, your financial situation now. And I'm going to let you lead the way because you've got more knowledge in this arena.
So, Lara, yeah, I've spent many years on codependence addiction work, and from what I've seen, a lot of people don't realize that spending can be an addiction in itself. So addictions are basically medicating our emotions. So we might be sad or angry or whatever, and we're trying to make ourselves feel better with the addiction. So spending addiction, you're a bit flat. I'll go shopping for a new dress or a new pair of shoes or whatever makes you feel happy, or a nice picture for the house. So we medicate the emotions in the short term, but of course it has dire consequences for our finances, particularly if you're doing it on credit card or you have a loan for it. So you go and buy the item for $100, but you don't pay it off straight away. So in the end, by the time you pay it off, it's actually been $200 worth of item that gave you 10, 15, maybe minutes, maybe half an hour of enjoyment, but it actually impacts your finances for the future. So those bright, shiny objects are short-term medication for however you're feeling, but long term they just devastate your finances. If you can work on that addiction and actually change it so that you're actually focusing on your financial future, that would be way better. So that's the spending addiction, but there are so many addictions. Anything that you do too much of or too little of can be addictive. So you could be an overeater and you're spending a fortune on food, or you might have an addiction to going out to fancy restaurants and you're spending a fortune on fancy restaurants. Or you might be heavily into golf and you're golfing 7 days a week and it's costing you a fortune. So we often think of addictions as in alcohol. Yes, spending $30, $40, $50 in alcohol a day is definitely going to impact your finances, or drugs, or anything else that you do addictively is going to cost you money. And it's going to impact your finances in a huge way. And as women, unfortunately, as we know, a lot of women end up in poverty when they're older. So if we can actually notice that we're doing something addictively and maybe have a look on the internet, people maybe want to do AA or whatever other addictive groups there are, or read books or watch videos to curb the addictions and actually address the emotions underneath. And then they can actually focus on money, because when you're distracted with addictions, with those bright, shiny objects or the over golfing or the over drinking or whatever it is, you're going to be way distracted from actually looking at your finances and knowing that you need to put X amount aside per week for your future. It really impacts you. It impacts you financially, mentally, emotionally, impacts your relationships, impacts your job. Any of those addictions just totally impact your life.
So in actual fact, what you're doing when you're doing that addiction, whether it's a one that we will all recognize, spending lots of money on alcohol, to something that you wouldn't necessarily recognize as an addiction, like golfing every day, when you actually haven't got the money to support that lifestyle. But you're compounding and making that the emotional side of why you're doing it even more deeper rooted, aren't you? Because you're just pushing it further and further down inside of yourself and just medicating it, basically.
You're not facing it. I agree. You're not facing it. And also, you're probably creating more misery in your life because you're, having trouble paying your bills, or you've ended up with this huge credit card debt. So it's giving you more anxiety, more depression, more sadness. So it's actually making the emotions worse because your life becomes out of control. When you're overdoing something, your life, it becomes overwhelming because, you might be over golfing. I'm using golfing as an example. It could be anything, but, you're working, you're rushing off to do this thing, and you're not doing your whole life. You're not on top of your bills. You're not on top of your relationships. You're not on top of your house. You're not on top of your everyday life because you're doing this to an extreme. So it actually creates overwhelm in your life as well. It's financial overwhelm, emotional overwhelm, perhaps relationship overwhelm, whatever's happening. It totally destroys your life if you're not looking at it. And you hear of, like, work addiction's another thing that a lot of people aren't aware of. And it's actually admired by society. People who work 13, 14 hours a day, they see that as something that's really good, but it wrecks relationships. You know, you're not there for your kids because you're supporting your family. So it has a value behind it, but it also has a huge toll on your whole life. You haven't got a life. Perhaps you're not exercising because you're working 13, 14 hours a day. You're doing takeaway food, you know, all those sorts of things. So even an addiction that you would think would be good isn't good. And if you're working those long hours, you're probably not sitting there and looking at your budgets and looking at how you can invest, how you can build passive income, because you're caught in that grind of getting up early, coming home late, and you're not actually facing your finances and looking at your future and what can I do to make life better, because you're actually avoiding. When you're doing addictions, you're avoiding being present, you're avoiding your emotions, and you're avoiding everything in your life. But of course, unless you're aware of it and you're ready to deal with it, then you will do that for the rest of your life. And unfortunately, a lot of men, not all men, but some women get caught up in that whole overworking, overwhelmed cycle as well.
And of course, what you're doing when you're so caught up in your own in your addiction, and potentially, you know, having a big impact on your money and your bank account, then it has that ricochet effect that, you know, if you're in a really bad place emotionally and medicating through spending on whatever it is, you're having an effect on your family, your wife, your husband, your children. They may not actually know what's happening with the money, but it might be the whole emotional stuff that just, you know, puts them into not a great place.
And it probably, they're not happy, they're whinging and complaining. So you're feeling bad because your relationships aren't good with your kids or your partner or whatever's happening. And that adds to the already bad feelings you have inside that you're already medicating. So you probably want to go and medicate even more, go have a couple more drinks or go buy another dress or a pair of shoes or whatever. You're going to go and medicate it even more, which is just going to be more overwhelming and more devastating financially as well.
And of course, we had a whole era. I don't know about now, and I'm not necessarily privy to how credit cards work. I've actually never had a credit card, but of course, people use credit cards, don't they, to, I mean, all sorts of reasons, to medicate themselves, spending on things that they don't actually have the money for, and as well as paying their bills. You know, people do resort to credit cards for that, unfortunately. So it's just like you're compounding on every level, aren't you? The money issue, potentially debt, putting your family at risk, and just deepening that emotional trauma that you're in, that you're feeding.
Exactly. But it takes a lot of guts to actually face this and notice that you're doing something too extreme. Or I'm overeating, or I'm overspending, or over drinking, doing drugs, overworking, whatever it is. You have to become aware of it, and then you've got to admit it to yourself. I mean, as the alcoholics are an example everyone knows, until they admit it to themselves, they're not going to work on it. So actually admitting, oh, I'm an overspender or I'm overeater or over whatever, you got to admit it to yourself. Then you need to deal with it, and you may need help to deal with it, because, you know, this is very deep-seated issues that probably come from childhood and are unconscious. So just saying, I'm going to stop spending, you might be able to do that for 3 or 4 weeks, and then your emotions bubble up like a volcano and you go spend. So you actually do need to work it properly and go and seek help. It's not something that's easy to do by yourself. And even if you stopped overspending, then it probably will pop up in another area because you've got those emotions underneath that you need to deal with, and the habits, and you need the support of other people to get through these sort of addictive behaviours.
And can I ask you, your knowledge on this comes from courses on exploring codependency. Is that the
Codependence
case?
and
Yeah.
addiction. So even codependency is based in having a bit of an addiction with fixing, helping, being thinking a lot about others. So rather than facing my own discomfort, my own emotions, and that's been a long journey, and I'm still working. I think it's like an alcoholic says, you know, they're still an alcoholic even though they might not have had a drink for 20 years. So codependency is a little bit more tricky because it's not just stopping the drinking, it's stopping the behaviours, it's doing boundaries, needs and wants, it's working the emotions underneath. So that in itself, I can see from my own behaviour, I was talking about overgiving, and that's part of my codependency, overgiving, and that's impacted me financially. So I have to stop myself from overgiving. I wanted to do it again the other day to someone, overgive, and I stopped myself. It's like, no, it's okay for me to be able to have enough money to pay my bills. I don't have to always rescue or help other people. And in actual fact, it doesn't help them on their journey. If they can work out how to get whatever it is for themselves, then that empowers them. So yes, the codependency in itself is a type of addiction as well.
It's also interlinked, isn't it, actually? So, and I mean, if we were going to give some people, if you know, if this speaks to some people and they think, I know that uh, I have addictive behavior and I'm actually just, you know, letting money go through that behavior and I have to address it. What would, you know, if they felt that they wanted to actually address it, what would the best step forward be to do?
I think I would Google and find out what's near them and what resonates with them, because some people are heavily into 12 steps. I've done a little bit of 12 steps codependence. It was quite good. There are books, there are videos, there are heaps of resources. You could perhaps get some free counselling. I think you just need to go for it and work out what suits you. You might read that book and it resonates, and the next book doesn't resonate. You might go to that counsellor and they do resonate and another one doesn't. You might try a 12-step program and that doesn't resonate with you. But I think it's the intention first up. You know, have the intention that, yes, this is wrecking my life. Yes, I'm overspending. I'm in $30,000 credit card debt or whatever it is, and say, this has to stop. I'm going to, you know, take my power back and do something about it and go and seek some help on it. And there are just so many resources. Once you have that intention, then you will find the resources that, you know, will resonate with you.
And from my perspective, I mean, I've always, if there's something that I want to deal with or learn about, I'll often go on to YouTube and find someone
Videos.
who, you know, I'll listen to a few people on that topic and I'll find the people who I resonate with and just to educate myself. And I mean, I did it for a specific reason and a specific topic, but for that, I found it, when I found my key people, it was a go-to for me to go and listen to. And instead of thinking I've got this crazy stuff that's wild in my brain, just by listening to experts or other experienced people in that arena, it's a great support, isn't it? And then from there you can decide whether you're going to find a group or
I just love the videos. The resources that are out there these days are just absolutely incredible. And there's many Facebook groups too, or Instagram. So if you're an overspender, I'm sure there's an overspending Facebook group or another support group, and sometimes even books. I know there is a love addiction book group that you could, you know, read through the book and work through the chapters together. So there are just so many resources out there. We are in such a lucky age that once you have the intention to stop doing whatever you're doing, that is the first step.
Mm.
And then you just go and find the resources that you need help with, and connecting with someone. I think connecting with a couple of people that can support you in your recovery from whatever the addiction is, and being very careful not to pick up another addiction. I know people that have stopped drugs, for example, and they've picked up work addiction. So it's like, okay, I've stopped the drugs, I've done the practical, which is the hard work, but then now I need to actually look at the emotions underneath, because I'm just going and picking up another addiction if, you don't work the emotions underneath what causes it.
So that's a distraction, isn't it? Distraction therapy. When you find something else.
Avoidance,
Yeah, avoidance.
medicating, avoiding,
Yeah.
whatever it is, you don't have to face the discomfort in your body. Whereas if you do the work, and that's where you might actually need to go to therapy and work the emotions and make friends with the emotions, not let them run your life, because basically those emotions that are driving you to drink or spend are running your life. And often those emotions are emotions from childhood. Often they're not current emotions. Sometimes they are, you split up with someone and you feel lonely, so therefore you go and drink. But a lot of the time it is from childhood, the shame, the fear, the anxiety, the anger, whatever the emotions are driving the addictions. But to deal with those underlying emotions, it's really powerful. It helps you change your life.
Yeah. You've got to be ready, willing, and have courage, haven't you, to go on that pathway. And actually on the Facebook, I know that there's people who say, oh, I don't like Facebook, what have you, but there's some amazing groups in there, and I've been in groups for various things, from business to inspiration to all sorts of things. And what I find is that people are incredibly giving, and very, very supportive of each other. So it's very possible that if somebody went and found a couple of groups and then honed it to the group that spoke to them, that was around their topic that they needed to address, it's very likely that you could find a buddy in, some of the groups even recommend having a couple of buddies that are there as a support system while you work through whatever it is that you're working through.
And some of the groups are just there for community, and some of the groups will have, say, a psychologist or a therapist running the group, and you might choose to do the therapist course or work with the therapist individually. But there's also online groups. So if you want to go the 12-step way, there's online AA, and there's online overeaters, and there's online overspenders. So there are actual online avenues as well for those sorts of things, but you just need to try them and see if they resonate for you. But it's once you've got that whole direction and that, what would you call it, that focus, that intention to do something about that and have it really strong in your body, then all these resources will open up. You just start and you just go through them until you find what suits you. But it's that whole drive, that intention that, no, I'm not doing this to my life anymore. It's wrecking me emotionally, financially, wrecking my relationships, whatever it's wrecking. And because we're talking about women and money, but it's wrecking your future, and it's wrecking your financial, and the stress. You're in so much credit card debt, you can't pay your bills. The stress on top of the addiction is just huge on your body, on your health, on everything, psychologically, mentally, emotionally.
I mean, some of this, when you're saying about the childhood element, I can see that a lot of this all would go back to your own value of yourself, your self-respect and self-love, having that love for yourself, to not actually put yourself through this hell of addiction, or this this destructive journey where you're destroying a part of your future and your life and potentially your family.
But of course, a lot of us didn't grow up in healthy childhoods, so that's when we need to work at it and look at it, unfortunately.
I know, can only stay in the box so long. Fiona, would you say that there is something around tapping that we could add in as an ending, a positive ending to
Let's do an overspending one. So even though I overspend, I totally, completely and utterly love and approve of myself. Even though I overspend when I don't have the money, I totally, completely and utterly love and approve of myself. Above the eyebrows, even though I overspend, I release the overspending and totally, completely and utterly love and approve of myself. I now release this old overspending habit. And I completely and utterly love and approve of myself. And on the chin, I now release this financially draining overspending habit, and I completely and utterly love and approve of myself. I now let go of this overspending habit and create a new and healthy habit, and I completely and utterly love and approve of myself. And then under the arms, pericardium, I now release any overspending, and I now completely and utterly love and approve of myself. So that would be the practical, but then you could look at the emotion. If you're ready to face the emotions underneath, maybe there's anxiety, maybe there's anger, maybe there's fear. So you could go through the emotion, even though I'm frightened, I completely and utterly love and approve of myself. Even though these emotions are overwhelming, I completely and utterly love and approve of myself. Even though I medicate these emotions with overspending, I now release these emotions and release the overspending, and I completely and utterly love and approve of myself. I now release the anxiety that leads to overspending, and I completely and utterly love and approve of myself. Under the arms, I now release the emotions that lead to overspending, and I completely and utterly love and approve of myself. And take a deep breath in. And release this addiction to overspending, letting go. Another deep breath in. Releasing the childhood patterns and emotions as you breathe out slowly. And one more, breathing in. Releasing anything that creates overspending, and a slow out breath. Picturing it totally gone, dissolving out like the clouds.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And of course, you would repeat that as often as you need to, and you would vary it according to your issues and where you're at.
What words spoke to you and what comes to mind, really.
That's right. And I feel a lot more peaceful now.
So do I. Thank you very much, Fiona.
Thank you, Lara.
Thank you. We'll speak soon again. Thank you for your time.